Longines, despite having a head start producing the first chronograph wristwatch movement, didn't have a sports watch produced in the updated sports watch style, so it failed testing. Rolex did, having copied Omega's Speedmaster configuration for the Daytona, but that wasn't the watch that was sent, another old-style delicate chronograph arriving at NASA's testing facilities instead, so that failed too. Hamilton, who should have been not just a shoo-in, but the sock, foot and leg as well, were still an American brand based in America back then, and so was the obvious choice given the Buy American Act of 1933, except they didn't read the request properly and sent a pocket watch instead. It was only the Omega Speedmaster that remained. And so Omega won by the two sweetest words in the English language: default. So once you've taken a quick moment to check and see if you're subscribed, a big thank you if you are, let's take a closer look at the luckiest watch ever made. Really, what's worth noting is that this is the chronograph wristwatch that set the trend for putting the tachymeter, usually printed directly onto the dial, outside on the bezel instead. That's what makes it a sports chronograph. It also increases the readability of the dial, of course, but really, if anything, it's just about finding a secondary use for the great big block of metal seated around the crystal to protect it. That's also what makes it a sports chronograph. Dive watches had their dive time bezels, which also served to take a few knocks and protect the watch in its sporting use, and so it made sense for the chronograph to do the same. Crown guards too make an appearance, pusher guards as well, although they evolved into the design a few years after the original launch in 1957. And it's big too, at 42mm. It wasn't that big when it first appeared, but the addition of all that extra protective padding inflated the case from an already sizable 38mm. Bear in mind, the first Submariner was a 37mm watch, and the pre-Daytona 6238 chronograph another millimeter smaller still at 36mm, so I think it's safe to say that the Omega Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch set the tone for big wristwatches, although thanks to short lugs, it's still wearable on most wrists. That's what this Speedmaster's configuration is, basically, a professional moonwatch. Once Omega realized they would be making watches for the first men on the moon, the first priority was to get straight to work and add the word professional to the dial, because let's face it, everything else they'd been up to that prior decade was pretty amateur. One of Omega's sticking points versus Rolex was an insistence on being seen to be the high quality option.